Welcome everyone and good evening, and thank you for coming along to the case study for Thin Black Line. My name is Fiona Trigg and I'm a curator here at ACMI. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of this land on which we meet tonight, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to any other elders who are here with us tonight. We're going to move to a discussion with some of the key creatives from the Thin Black Line shortly, and there'll be a chance for you to ask questions as well. But before we begin, we'll have a short introduction from Marshall Heald, who's the Director of Television and Online Content at SBS, and then also we'll be joined by Joe Dillon, Head of Development and Production at Screen Queensland. SBS and Screen Queensland commissioned the series Untold Australia, these 3 incredible VR works. And I'd just like to let you know that the 3 works are playing for the next few months down in ACMI's Screen World's free exhibition. We have a VR lounge down there where we rotate interesting new VR content. So if you haven't had a chance to see it through the conference and you're resident in Melbourne, you can come back anytime over the next few months and view the works. So please welcome Marshall. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. It's wonderful to see you here at this showcase of a really exciting new VR project. Before I go on, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that are gathered on today and pay my respects to elders past and present. So for more than 40 years, promoting diversity has been at the heart of everything we do at SBS. We want to see diversity on screen, we want to see diversity behind the camera, and we want to tell stories with underlying thematics that help Australians to understand that the greatest asset of this country is not what we dig out of the ground, but the diversity and differences of our people. We also want to keep innovating. We want to find new ways to tell stories, to evolve, how stories can be told. All great storytelling connects with us on an emotional level, and new technologies like VR enable us to place audiences at the heart of really intimate experiences to hopefully create a deeper understanding of the world in which we live, to create empathy and understanding. And so our Digital Creative Lab, run by JP, who's sitting down in the front row here, has a really sort of enviable track record in innovative storytelling, using new technologies like VR or voice recognition technology, and we've got a really exciting slate of projects coming out over the next 12 months. One of these projects is our Untold Australia VR series, working together with Screen Queensland, which really explores the theme of displacement through a number of different lenses. And so tonight's showcase spotlights A Thin Black Line, which follows the story of director Douglas Watkin's own mother, who was forced to evacuate during the 1942 Darwin bombings. Also included in the series is Every King Tide, which takes audiences on a journey to meet the people of a tiny island in the Torres Strait, which is slowly being swallowed by the sea. And the final documentary, which we launched a few months ago, is called Inside Manus, which gives Australians a really rare insight into life on Manus Island through the personal experiences of 3 detainees. So look, I encourage you to check them all out through the SBS VR app. So before I hand over, I do want to sincerely thank Screen Queensland, who co-funded this initiative with us. As well as funding it, we kind of walked hand in hand on this sort of new adventure in a new risky kind of area. And so I'm now going to hand over to Joe Dillon, who's the Head of Development and Production at Screen Queensland, to also say a few words. Thank you all for coming.
Hello, thank you for coming. I won't take up much more of your time because I know you're really here to listen to this lot. But I would like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet on tonight, to thank AIDC and ACMI for allowing us this opportunity to showcase this really exciting new work, and to SBS as well, who've been fantastic partners in this journey that we've gone on to make this Untold Australia series for virtual reality. Here is this amazing team from VRTOV and the writer-director Douglas Watkin, whose story this is. one of the free films experiences which have been made through this partnership. Look, I think when we looked at all of this and thought, let's do it, and it didn't take very long to come to that point of let's do it, which is another reason why it's great working with SBS. I think we knew that these stories were going to be a chance to look at something which was experimental, technically, and innovative here in Australia. That we believed, I think, that we'd find some great untold stories. But I think what we didn't really know was how emotionally affecting these stories would be on this platform. And I think, you know, untold stories are sometimes stories which are made to be shared and felt. And this is a perfect example. A Thin Black Line is a family story, it's an Indigenous story, it's a Queensland story, and it's a global story, and as such, it's the kind of story that connects us one to the other. And we at Screen Queensland are incredibly proud to have been a part of it. So I'll hand you over to these guys, but before they begin to speak, we'll have a look at the trailer. Thank you.
I know that my hand is grabbing charcoal and doing a stroke, and that's at its core. That's what drawing is reduced to. In the VR, all of those strokes, they all become animated. There's an element of movement and time. In terms of the translation of what I'm doing, I'm thinking that the end result is like a whole world of my drawings given a different kind of life to them.
So I'm just going to introduce the people on stage. To my left here is Oscar Raby. Oscar's an award-winning multimedia artist and the creative director of VRTOV, the company that produced this VR work. His virtual reality documentary Ascent from 2013 about the Chilean dictatorship has been exhibited worldwide, including at Sundance New Frontier, IDFA, DocLab and the Sheffield Documentary Festival, where it received the Audience Choice Award for cross-platform. Sorry, do I have to say all that again? Oscar's great. He makes VR. He's won lots of awards. Next to him, we have Douglas Watkin, the director of this work. Douglas is from Cairns and has a long list of credits as a producer and a director in both drama and documentary. Most recently, the documentary feature film Ella, about Ella Havelka, the first Indigenous dancer to be invited into the Australian Ballet, a really fantastic film. If you have the opportunity to watch that, seek that out. Next to Douglas, we have Vernon Ah Kee, whose drawings were used in this work. Vernon is from North Queensland and identifies as a rainforest Barma person. Most well known as a portrait artist, and for his drawings, Vernon's also made text-based works and video installations. He represented Australia at the 2009 Venice Biennale. His work was shown in the 2015 Istanbul Biennale, and of course many other exhibitions around Australia and across the world. And currently has work showing in the Adelaide Biennale, where I believe he's just been, says the show is good. Yeah. And on the far left, we have Kalonica Quigley. Kalonica is a 3D artist and games developer who has developed award-winning games both in small teams and as an individual. She currently works as the lead 3D artist at VRTOV, the studio, obviously, that produced this. Kalonica has a fantastic website where you can see many examples of her beautiful artwork and the other projects and games that she's worked on in the past. So if you'd just like to enjoy welcoming the people. Okay, so I believe this clicker should click the thing.
Okay, Google, change the slide.
Did I do that? Okay. So while these 4 people are here tonight to talk about the work, they do represent a larger crew that Oscar wanted me to highlight. So just behind you on the screen, you'll see the many other people involved in this production whose work is represented by these 4 people tonight. So I thought we might start by just talking to Douglas Watkin and just ask a little bit about the genesis of the project, the nature of the story for people who haven't seen the work, and some of the inspiration behind the story and why you wanted to tell this story in a virtual reality form.
Thank you, Fiona. And also I'd like to acknowledge any blackfellas that are here in the room. Thank you. Firstly, this piece is actually part of another piece called The Queen and I. Thank you. Called The Queen and I. And that was actually a short animation that I did in 2011, which was actually my father's story. And years later, I thought, wouldn't it be great to actually focus on my mother's side of the story? I like to place events like, for example, The Queen and I was set in 1954 when the Queen first came to Australia, and she was in the... my father was one of the drivers in the Queen's cavalcade, like that. He was like driver number 13. And, this happened in Cairns, you know what I mean? And it was kind of a main event. But really, it was, the story was about how my parents met, and if it wasn't for this event, they wouldn't have met and I wouldn't have been born, Back to the Future kind of thing. Yeah. And the style of animation that was used was like kind of branching out, borrowing elements from the Phantom comics and all that kind of stuff, and I kind of like that line work. Fast forward years later, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to maybe pay tribute to my mother, who was living at Darwin at the time. She was 5 years old, and she was a part of the evacuee back in 1941. In December, around Christmas time, when they had to get out of their hometown, they had to leave. And as you can see by the drawings, although you do have Darwin, one of the photos was in Cairns, but I guess there's elements that we used. I guess I had to tell that story because for us, like blackfellas, like we need to keep them stories alive,
Sure.
To achieve that.
Sure. And I think the story of the bombing of Darwin is a story that's not as well known in Australian culture as perhaps it should be, because the impact was enormous, wasn't it?
There was more bombs dropped on Darwin compared to Pearl Harbor.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pearl Harbor is well documented, but a lot of people don't know there was more ordnance dropped in Darwin, to give you an idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But your mum was a child during that time.
She was only 5.
Yeah.
My mother is one of 14, yeah, before TV, literally, and there was actually 5 of them in Darwin. So my grandmother had to, get 6 kids on a ship,
Right.
and at the time it was only women and children. The men had to stay.
Right.
So they had to get up and leave. They only had about 24 hours to, evacuate. And I just can't think of, like, you're a 5-year-old, but even as a parent having 6 kids, I'm flat out trying to deal with one of them. That's, yeah.
Yeah. So these are some of the images that you worked with just to do your research. And did you share these images with the team when you started working on the show? Or?
Yeah, I guess like us, like a lot of people in the room, we're all storytellers, okay? And I guess as part of the research, some of these projects, like whether it's VR or 2D or whatever, or live action, are a part of a bigger picture. Like these images, like my mum told the story. We actually did a documentary on her anyway.
Right.
So I thought, so what we've kind of done is we've kind of chosen elements or certain aspects of that story to translate into VR.
So why did you make the decision to turn it into a kind of a narrative when you moved into the VR project, and not just, what was it about the story that you thought would lend itself to a more fictional telling rather than just a straight documentary?
I guess for me, the VR, like, just picture yourself as a 5-year-old being dropped in this world and looking up, because, like, we tell it from a 5-year-old's perspective.
Right.
And I guess the nightmare of being a part of that,
Yeah.
you know, and I guess it lends itself into that VR experience. So all the experiences that my mother went through and the horrors, all of you guys will be able to experience that.
Yeah. I think we have some pictures. This is from the Queen and I.
Yeah, that's actually from the Queen and I. So that was like, the genesis of, of this part of this storyline that I created.
How long is that film?
Again, it runs about the same time as the VR.
So about 12 minutes, but this is just an animation.
It's just it's 2D animation, and just getting inspiration from that. But I would say that it's not really a prequel sequel, because, like, they both stand on their own.
Of course.
That's the
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
And I like to say they're more like DNA strands of the storyline. I wouldn't necessarily say, like, this is so.
So this work is based on, obviously, historical fact, but you chose again to kind of turn it into a beautiful story about the meeting of your parents in this historical event.
I just thought it would be fun, like, where were you, on this particular day and all that stuff. And it was fairly significant, even as, like, putting in Indigenous context, like, blackfellas, like my father, like, sad to say, like, he was fair. And a lot of the places that he was allowed to, even with his cousins, and Vernon can probably touch on this as well, is like, they weren't allowed to go into pubs or bars or anything like that. My dad was,
Yep.
And I guess at the time, being a blackfella in 1954, and you're driving the car for the Queen, and it actually happened by accident, because majority of the soldiers obviously were from, overseas, and they were dropping like flies because of the weather in Cairns was so hot. So at the time, my father was a part of, he was a mechanic by trade, but he also, they did national service. So all those guys back then, it was compulsory to do national service. So he had his uniform. So they said, well, what about you? What do you do? And he goes, I'm just a mechanic. You got a uniform? Yep, sure. So put you in there.
There's a picture of him.
Yeah, so that was like my grandmother. And that's where he kind of, grew up in a place called Malaytown.
Right.
So,
There's a picture of him driving the car.
Yeah.
It's really great. So given that this film turned out so beautifully, and I do urge you to try and track it down, is it available online?
No, it's like a gallery piece, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So if you have the opportunity to see it, it's really wonderful work. But having made this work out of your family story in such a beautiful kind of animation, why, when it came to tell your mother's story, did you choose to go for VR rather than a linear film? And maybe you could just talk about that process of making that decision and pulling this team together to start the work.
Challenge.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Headaches? No. And obviously being attracted to the tech and the possibilities of the next wave or the future of storytelling, how we can tell stories. And regardless of what medium, whether I'm doing short or long or features or EPing, I mean, like, I just love, as long as, you can tell a story, I guess it doesn't rely, like, it shouldn't have to matter what medium you use. I mean, so yeah.
So you just thought this story was a good opportunity to launch yourself into VR and see what happened?
Well, it lends itself. It has a very visual,
Right.
like narrative involved, so.
Okay. So just talking to Vernon, how did that relationship, I know you two have known each other for many years and you're old friends, so you have an existing kind of language of communication and you know each other's work, but how did you approach Vernon about creating some of the visuals for this work? How did that come about? Or maybe Vernon, you could tell us, how did Douglas approach you?
The visuals for the...
How did he invite you to become involved in the Thin Black Line?
Oh, well, we had been... Douglas had mentioned to me some years ago about the idea that he wanted to do a project that incorporated my drawing. Mm-hmm. And there's been a couple of ideas that we've been kicking around over the years. But
how can we collaborate?
Because we've known each other for a long time.
Right.
And
and so Douglas, actually, I think Douglas rang me up and just said, I got the project finally. This is the project. We have to do it. And he kind of just, he didn't barrage me into it, but I think he just said, it's your drawing and VR, and this company is the best.
No, I basically rang her up and I said, Vernon, it's time.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's what I did. I didn't describe what it was. I said, it's time.
Yeah, he said, that was the first thing he said. He said, it's time. It's time. And but I was also, I'm at the point in my career where I'm kind of up for anything. I'll give anything a go. And I just said, okay, all right, let's. And then we had a meeting in Brisbane. That was the first time we all met.
Yeah.
And after the first meeting, it was really only to see if we could get on. And because I was pretty sure I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And if they hated my guts, that wasn't going to happen.
So the pictures you can see on the screen here, sorry, just for those of you who may not have seen Vernon's great documentary installation called The Tall Man, which looks at Palm Island and the events of the death of Cameron Domagee, sorry,
yeah.
And the resulting kind of chaos on the island following the trial and the incident itself. So I just wanted to put these images up just to give you a sense that Vernon has a kind of keen sense of documentary in his own creative practice. It's a really biting and fantastically kind of interesting installation. But also, you're probably more familiar with some of his portraiture, which I was wondering, Vernon, do you also see portraiture as a kind of documentary or more like a kind of storytelling? Where do you think it sits?
I do see it as a kind of documentary, actually. I mostly do portraits, almost exclusively do portraits of my family. Actually, I've only done one portrait of someone not my family, and that was William Barrack, and it's in the collection here at NGV.
Right.
It's the only portrait I've done of somebody not my family. And so, yeah, I do very much. There isn't a narrative to the drawings because they are people who are whole and realised to me. There's not even really a story to tell. It's when I'm doing the portraits, I already know the story.
Right.
And what I'm doing is just recording them for my own sake, but also to give my family an idea of what these people mean to me.
Right.
And all of us, actually, the whole family. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're usually much kind of larger than life size, aren't they? They're really.
Yeah,
you work on a
mostly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a lot of the portraits I do now are quite large. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So they're kind of immersive for the audience. So VR is sort of the next step in one way of kind of taking a drawing and being able to step inside it for the audience.
Yeah. Well, there's a British painter who makes really big paintings, and he said that he was asked why he makes really big paintings, and he said it's the first best way for me to be in the painting
Right.
while he's working on it, and I very much feel like that. But
Right.
certainly the Tall Man installation and other video installations that I've had are meant to be immersive. So I suppose VR was kind of something that just came along that just sat within my sensibilities pretty well. Once I got my head around it, mind you, had no idea what we were doing until Kalonica was working her magic with it. And, yeah.
A few more drawings. Okay, so speaking of Kalonica, here are some examples of her work. So Kalonica, I was wondering if you could just explain to us what it is that a 3D artist actually does. How do you define that?
I guess my role is to make everything, so the environment and the props and the characters, basically everything that you can see in the final product.
So when you're working in games or in VR, are you often working with other people's images to start off with, or do you also create your own images and environments?
I guess like the traditional pipeline for a 3D artist is to take concept art from a concept artist working in 2D and translate that into 3D.
Right. So you create things in a 3D space so that they can be moved around and reflect the activity that's happening in that space in a realistic way, or a way that's realistic for the world that you're creating. Yeah, so you're really a world builder. Is that how you would describe it? Yeah. And so you've worked a lot in games, so you're working with a game engine, and that's the same technology that you're using in VR, is that true?
Yeah, so from my perspective as the 3D artist, it's not really all that different whether the project is VR or a video game. It's the same kind of pipeline, yeah.
Right. And so to you, Oscar, how did you get involved in this project?
In this project,
Yeah.
we met with Doug at MIF 2016. We were just prior to starting this presentation, we were retracing our steps, and we realized that we met in at MIF 2016.
Yeah.
And what, a year and a half later, we're here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
it was
like-
pretty
Yeah.
quick. For we were comparing kind of the development cycle of ELA, which took about 4 years, and for us to go from handshake to panel was a year and a half.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's been pretty good. It's been pretty good to for us. It's quite natural to work in a game engine, which by its own nature is an interactive platform
Right.
in which actions happen.
Right.
They're not pre-recorded and then performed by the machine,
Right.
but they are established and then they are performed by the user.
Right.
We take that as a natural kind of default baseline, and then understanding the filmmaking tropes and the filmmaking approach, which is the one that Doug has, natural to his language, was a good challenge, but mostly a good process to go into to make this work happen.
I think we have a trailer here from Ascent, so we might just play this just to give a sense of. Is this? Yeah.
It's a very short one. So it's an abstract piece that I
I
made.
don't know. Do we have?
Just a quick introduction. Ascent is a VR piece that I made about my father being a military officer, part of the dictatorship in Chile, where I come from. And I worked in that project during the best part of 2013. So that was my first steps into VR as a medium for non-fiction stories. And it has a lot to do with how we connected in terms of how you carry these stories with you for years and years and years, even though that you were not part of the the initial seed of the story.
Yeah. We have it now.
Here we go.
Yep, there you go.
Hi Dad. I'm glad you could see this. I thought the instructions might have been a bit confusing, but here you are, so I guess it worked. I wanted to send you something real, and oddly enough, look what I came up with. Look around. If you stare at certain things for long enough, something happens. We're looking back to 1973. Right on this spot, you have just been notified of a court-martial taking place up the hill. But today, I want you to take the time you didn't take back then, and stay with me for a little longer.
So yeah, briefly, the core of the story is my father witnessing a mass execution in 1973 and how that marked his life as a human and as a professional. and how that rippled into our family life and the work that I do now.
So as we can see from that trailer, and I'm sure you're aware, VR is very much a single-person user experience where you're able to control what you see by the movement of your eyes within the VR world, and also through controls if it's interactive. So it's a very different kind of storytelling from a linear kind of tale. So I would just really love to hear, Douglas, how you said about thinking about the potential of VR with telling this story, and how you kind of engaged in the writing process. Was that something you did on your own, or did you work closely with Oscar to kind of create and shape the story, knowing that you would be able to offer people that level of interactivity?
Yeah, well, we had like just a baseline kind of script, kind of story. Well, obviously, I had a pitch that, I pitched to both Oscar and Katie, just to follow. And then I guess Oscar was there whether it could interpret into VR, So yeah, and we kind of bounced around, ideas, and like the through line, the story was always there. It was always about, getting at a Darwin, and Oscar and team, we were just looking for ways on how that would translate into VR, and I guess we worked really well. We're still here. We're still talking to each other now. But yeah. I mean, you want to add in the?
Well, when you experience the work, you are actually in the role of Douglas's mother as a young child. It's kind of her point of view. Was that always the way you had imagined telling that story?
Yeah, definitely. It was always from my mother's.
Yeah.
Point of view.
So,
yeah.
As a film director, it's very hard to kind of capture a point of view. You don't normally get to do that. So, what kind of challenges did that throw for you?
One of the challenges, I guess, because like for people here, I guess the directors, producers working in that kind of 2D linear format, in VR, as a director, you have to surrender the camera.
Yes.
If that makes sense. If you like that, so because all of a sudden you don't have that control, because now it's up to the viewer.
And so, how did you work with Vernon to pull together the suite of drawings that you used as the kind of raw material? What did you ask him to give you?
He had access to my photos as reference points of my family, and the thing is, like, our families kind of grew up together anyway, so there's not much physical difference.
No, it's really not, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we have similar backgrounds, so a lot of the photos that Douglas was showing me, there was already a familiarity there. So, and it was easy to kind of move forward in the process and kind of have Oscar just say, well, this is the next scene. These are the elements we need to capture, and it was so new. I had no idea, of course, but it was all really, really exciting for me.
What did you find exciting about it?
Just the whole thing. I was really excited at seeing what Kalonica would do with the strokes and the marks and the shapes I was making, and I just thought it was amazing, because I didn't know when Douglas would tell me, we're going to use your drawings and they're going to be animated and I could imagine quite a bit, but it turned out better, and there was always more things that the team were adding in terms of atmosphere and reach, and this is before all the sound went in and everything. And even now I just just grateful that these guys kind of pointed at me and said, do this.
Thank you for doing it. Vernon Ah Kee, hello.
Yeah.
What about you, Oscar? Did you have to give kind of hints to Douglas and Vernon about the kind of elements you thought would work well in a VR world, or?
Yeah, we had two very clear pathways with both of them, and clear in hindsight. It's not like we defined them and we followed through all the way to the end. We were discovering them together. And the two clear pathways were, one, understand how we move from this linear script onto one that allows and propitiates and supports interactive instances, interactive moments in which you're connecting with the character through an action, not just what happens inside the frame, but what you're actually doing, which is something that we deeply believe in the work that we do. You get a different sort of ownership of the story, different access to the characters' inside world when you do something that they're doing directly. So that was the conversation regarding the narrative development. In terms of the aesthetic treatment and the aesthetic development itself, it was going back to the foundational elements, which is to say basically the big question of how do we move drawing from a 2D medium to a 3D medium? What happens with the fragment? How do we keep the sense of carbon on canvas in a medium that, you know, is basically light switching on and off?
Yeah, because it's not, you haven't gone down the path of traditional animation. Like you didn't take Vernon's drawings and turn them into animation so much, did you? That's not how you would describe what happened, or?
Well, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, Kalonica can speak to that.
Well, I guess for me, I was thinking about it more as turning it into sculpture.
Right.
So they're all quite static, but drawn in to appear and drawn out to disappear. Yeah.
Right. We're going to hear.
Yeah, that.
Just put it in a machine and it comes out.
That's right. Yes.
We're going to hear a little bit more from Kalonica in a moment about that process, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about, you know, the opportunities for offering audiences interactivity, because it's a big change from writing a documentary or a drama where it's a linear process. What limitations or excitement did you find from having that opportunity? Were there things you wanted to do that you realised you couldn't do in VR, or, you know, things that maybe Oscar suggested that you suddenly thought, oh, that would be amazing? I mean, how did you go about...
More planes. Sorry.
But working out at what points the audience gets to interact with the imagery, and at what point the story just carries the audience member along.
Yeah. I guess coming off The Queen and I, like having already worked in short animation, I kind of use that same work template for The Thin Black Line, because, you know, obviously we've done voiceover work. I mean, the actors that we had in there, we had like Aaron Farzo, you know, from The Straits. We had Jimmy Barney, who was in Marbo, you know. So, yeah, so we had that's what I mean. There's a big list of people, you know, that worked on this work. And not just the voices, but the sound design as well. The sound design, it was like a collision of different worlds, because I was bringing on some of my guys and your guys and all that stuff, like, yeah, my sound, and then go through you guys, and trying to form a visual language, and hopefully develop some sort of shorthand between ourselves. Yeah, so we weren't so, you know, because this was my first VR.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I love the fact that because you're embodying a child throughout the piece, and you have a remote control, and you can sort of see the arms of the child at times during the work, and there's a few things you can do, like you can pick up a doll that's kind of a central figure, and you can move the doll from side to side. So while the story is happening around you, you can be playing with the doll, and it really evokes that sense of being a child and having your own world while you're aware of the adult dramas that are going around with you, and you can move the doll and see her plaits move and her legs move. It's a really beautiful thing to do while the story is going. And I'm wondering, how did you come up with that idea?
Well, Oscar?
Just seeing the pictures.
Yeah.
It's like, it's on the script. Just seeing the pictures and trying to understand what could be the token of shifting scales, which is basically you are being sheltered by your family, but then there's something bigger that's affecting them. How can we move that one scale down so you do the same with this token? And that was the door.
Right. And maybe you could talk about some of the other moments where the audience person can interact with the work.
So hopefully it's not a spoiler, but it will be. That if you interact with the doll, once we found the doll as being that visual and narrative device all in the one, you know, asset, the one prop, we realized that there was an opportunity there to do that shifting of scales with the father being sheltered by you.
Right.
So it's very simple kind of matching of what you do with the doll is the opportunity for you to do with your father.
Right.
Which again, in the universe that we created, it's a dreamlike sequence. But it wants to be that thing of we talked about when we were talking about what it meant.
Yeah.
It was that kind of coming of age moment in which you know that you might be sheltered, but now is your kind of goal. You have the opportunity to provide that shelter to someone else, and it so happens that it's your father.
The Queen and I was based on the relationship between the mother and son. This one was based between the father and the daughter this time. So so that was one of the through lines. That kind of connects the piece.
And as they evacuate from Darwin, there are moments in the journey where you can interact and affect the kind of time scale of the journey. Would you like to talk a little bit about why you chose those moments to introduce interactivity into the story?
I guess, especially when boarding the boat, I really
Right.
wanted to have that strong kind of, because at the time my mother and her siblings were getting on the boat, and the father, they were trying to look for the dad, and my granddad, he came running towards them with the doll, and in real life, he came running towards them, and the guards had their bayonets and said, "Nah, don't cross this line," or whatever like that. So Mum remembers seeing her parents kiss behind the soldiers and then
Right.
getting ripped apart at the same time. So and there was a lot of confusion, and I guess having that moment,
The moments that we kind of let time pass under your control or be stopped by your action or lack of, sometimes are about looking around and taking it in for a second, extra than what the filmic time wants to dictate. That said, it is written and is created as a tragedy. You are going there and you're advancing relentlessly. But the thing is, as it certainly seems to happen, you might know that you're going to have a bad time, or you know that you have some expectations in your planning for your day, for your the time ahead. But at some point, you get the chance of feeling that life carries on
Right.
without your intention and without your planning.
Right.
And these moments kind of bring about that sense of maybe there's a way, out, even there might not be one. It's illusion. That's what I'm saying. That sheltering father is not something that's going to save father. And probably I'm trying to make a savior for you to talk about your father in real life today. But that's kind of the intention narratively. Your father. So
Well,
about your father.
it jumps to a kind of metaphorical level at that point, doesn't it?
There are certain parallels that are happening, I guess, with all art. And Vernon will tell you, I guess, when you make art or films or anything like that, you put yourself in there, but also what is happening currently in your life. My father at the moment he has dementia, and my mother, they had to have a forced separation because we had to put him at home. And I guess you see that separation come through the thin black line between the father and the I'm getting confused now.
Yeah.
I'm getting emotional, sorry.
No, that's okay. Well, maybe at this point we might throw to Kalonica, who's going to present a small presentation within this presentation, which just gives you some more visual detail about the work that she did, taking Vernon's drawings and putting them into the 3D world. Is the clicker? So if we can throw to Kalonica's presentation, thanks.
So I'm just going to take you through some of our journey defining the visual style of the project and how we translated Vernon's work into this VR experience. So as we've already mentioned, it's a real-time interactive 3D piece that we've made in a video game engine. And because that's the tool we used, that's often the language we use while we're developing this project. Working in game engines, working in a game engine has a lot of, forces a lot of assumptions of what kind of project you're trying to make, whether it's like fun, light entertainment that might have certain mechanics or realistic graphics. And if that's left unaddressed, then the game engine itself is the aesthetic. And we at VRTOV really don't want our work to look like traditional video game. And a large part of how we approach this is to simply draw our inspiration from outside the digital medium altogether. So here's a few examples of video games that do this. And by using the language of a physical medium to communicate to their audience, the work has a distinctive, attractive identity. Although sometimes it seems impossible to bring these physical elements into a digital 3D space, it forces us to really focus in on what we are trying to represent. If we can only represent the bare minimum, what is it about charcoal that makes it appear like charcoal? We can't escape the digital nature of our medium, but we can create an illusion. We can aim to evoke the memory of the physical world. VRTOV explored this in our previous project, The Turning Forest, where we worked with illustrator James Gilliard. So his work is very 60s, 70s graphical style with bold, flat colors. And it was an interesting challenge to translate his very 2D work into VR, the best digital representation of 3D space. So an important part of our process was to pull out the repeating shapes, patterns, and colors and consider how we could reconstruct the space with just those elements. With Vernon's charcoal work, we were exploring an entirely new art style, so we had a whole new set of problems to solve. Charcoal is a medium that relies on the friction of the charcoal connecting with the canvas. By its nature, the medium is kinetic, reactive, and gestural. Part of the artwork is the evidence of the time and energy it took to create. A key feature of Vernon's style is how he creates the impression of volume and detail using the density of line work. It appears as though the lines have pulled together to form the face, and as though it is irrelevant, the rest of the figure fragments away, exposing the lines used to construct. These ghostly dark forms are even more revealing in the way the density of the strokes has been used to create volume. This artwork was the starting point for me as I began to consider how this would work spatially in VR, translated from 2D to 3D. It's clearly constructed from individual strokes that intersect and build up to create form, so it made sense to start by exploring in that direction. So in our first little experiment, I just literally reconstructed this piece with lines suspended in space, and this started to give us an idea of the effects of volume, depth, and perspective, but this was losing the initial elegance of Vernon's piece, because the lines sort of stuck out aggressively at you and invaded your space. It also looks obviously digital, and our aim was to reduce those elements, and though it sounds impossible, try to remove them altogether. We wanted to include the imperfections and irregularities that are such an integral part of this physical medium. These TV show opening titles are messy and explosive to mimic the debris of war and highlight how dynamic the medium can be. The differences in weight, texture, friction, pressure, and pace, and the resulting dust, density, and fragmentation, all these subtle elements beyond the static final piece. An integral part of our pre-production was an in-person workshop with Vernon to identify the qualities of the medium and discuss the process and intent of his work. Even the simple strokes pictured here gave us so many answers of how he would approach our experience as an art piece. We looked at the charcoal itself, all different kinds, and how much they can vary even within the same type. We looked at the way it reflects light and how that could be used as a way to add color to our black and white experience, as well as make the line work appear more tangible and present as it reacts to the viewer's presence. We also looked at different kinds of paper and canvas and the drastic effect that can have on the charcoal. So here is the soft canvas that makes the charcoal smear and has a kind of cloudy look. And a harsher canvas causes the charcoal to break and be more scratchy. And the resulting debris from every stroke, how would we represent that in our project? Every moment of this workshop was so valuable to us, as Vernon exposed how the scenes could be revealed, the pacing, how much pressure in the lines, all these subtle elements we could include to help it feel authentic. Later on in development, Vernon created this series of swatches for us. They're just simple sketches demonstrating different strokes and gradients with the intention of exposing the elements he uses to construct his work, but also for us to literally take these pieces and bring them into the VR experience. To me, this highlighted the difference between working with a fine artist compared to a digital artist. A traditional concept artist is already considering how their work will be translated into 3D, already working within the digital restrictions. But an artist familiar with a physical medium isn't held back by these restrictions. They use a different language, and therefore bring new elements and textures, new qualities that can craft new identities, tell new stories, and evoke feelings that are not commonly explored in digital experiences. And for us, the developers, that means new problems to solve. Returning to the computer, here I've tried to piece together the minimum elements needed to create a convincing charcoal stroke. So this is just a photograph of one of Vernon's strokes, and then it's masked off and has a particle effect. We wanted to capture the process of drawing, not just the final static image. We started to think about how the strokes would exist in 3D space. Is each stroke a flat plane, or does it have its own volume? Will the world be constructed like a pop-up book with lots of layers? And how will it move? Like we discussed before, would it be like a hand-drawn animation, or are they more like sculptures? Here we've started to look at how we would apply Vernon's swatches to 3D models. The underlying model has a regular silhouette, and the tone is imperfect to help give the impression of a hand-drawn image. And of course, one of the biggest questions from the start of this project is how would we translate Vernon's 2D portraits and apply it to a 3D model? Due to the intricate and precise nature of Vernon's strokes, they're very difficult to imitate. So here I've pulled out the features of one of his existing works and erased everything between. We then apply it to the 3D model and add the crosshatch back on over the top. And this is when something clicked, and it felt like we were getting some of the features we'd identified at the start. This is beginning to give the impression of a net of strokes that have been layered to create density and depth. And as we'd discovered in our workshop, adding specular highlights helped make the charcoal seem more tangible. And also identifying the transparent edges that's so unique to charcoal. In this example, we were trying to make it appear as though the 3D world was being drawn by hand and with an impression of gesture. We saw this as a way to move from scene to scene with the environment drawing in and out as though part of one composition. We wanted to keep it as minimal as possible while still grounding the objects and giving the impression of depth, volume, and atmosphere. And this is how the project looks in its final form, a combination of all the things we'd learned. Thank you.
Thanks, Kalonica. And I think if you haven't had a chance to see the work, you can see from those video clips the really beautiful experience of watching Vernon's drawings move and come to life. I mean, it's quite hypnotic. Apart from the incredible story, just the being inside that world of drawing is a really beautiful experience. And what was it like for you, Vernon, to start to see those lines that are so much a part of your body and your practice kind of take on a movement given by someone else? What did that feel like?
Well, for me, it was really enjoyable, you know, to have your work animated like that, but completely familiar. I was surprised. I thought there wasn't any part of it that I didn't recognise,
right,
really, which is the point. And some of the, like the transitional scenes where things just start appearing, when I first watched those back, I was just thinking, oh, this is how I would do it.
Right.
You know?
That's good.
At really fast speed, but yeah, but you know, yeah, which was the point, because we spoke about that, Oscar and I especially, you know, talking about, you know, the order of the strokes, and a whole within a drawing process, this goes first, then that, and to end off a drawing, these last strokes are these, and so that's the way the whole process is animated. So it looks very familiar to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very hypnotic and so beautiful to be inside that world.
Also, it's like walking in an art gallery as well, you know, 'cause
Yeah.
you get to see where it starts, you know, because I guess with most final, like the output, we see the final product. Here, you actually see it getting made.
Yeah, that's right.
It's actually getting constructed as you watch it.
Yeah, it's like
in
sitting
universe.
there watching someone else do my drawings. Kalonica doing my drawings.
We can all be replaced by machines.
AI.
Well, not quite yet, anyway.
Not yet.
So maybe you spoke before about having to relinquish the single camera eye that you're used to having as a director. Maybe, Oscar, you could help us work out a little bit about the process of sort of storyboarding for VR. I think we have
work
some
with
images.
a great artist. He actually had the opportunity to work on another VR piece, Orbital Vanitas, which you might be familiar with, by Sean Gladwell.
Yeah.
And he discovered there this method. So he was very keen on sharing it with us, and we were very fortunate to be able to incorporate it in our methodology. So the method that Jack Nesbitt has is, I don't know if you can see on that screen, there are faint lines behind the drawing that describe a cube opened up, the way you would do some sort of origami. So just behind the tallest cloud, you can see one of the squares. So picture that is an open cube. In that cube, just like you would do in an origami piece, wraps around you. In that way, we could map what would be seen in each one of these kind of quadrants, multiple quadrants. And that helped us understand what were the narrative kind of compass points. What was happening north, which would be your main center of attention. What was happening south, which in each narrative moment would be complementary to what was happening north. And sometimes we would play with maybe nothing happens north, 10% of the intensity of the narrative weight happens south, but you have most of the things happening in front of you. Yeah. With the method that we're looking at on the screen, we were able to very quickly move and remove objects and play with the balance of that. So even though we have to, give away, which is a good thing, camera work and even editing when we work with interactive moments. So in editing, I'm talking about time-based editing. So when do we cut? We also gain the chance of suggesting, the chance of suggestion as a tool, a narrative tool, is something that we are gaining. Yeah, it's not everything is kind of tamed, but is laid out. Yeah, sometimes we kind of refer to it as designing a dinner party. You can put the plates, and then the experience that each one of the guest has is different, but you are suggesting that this is the order that you want them to enjoy the experience. So here you can see that what I was talking about before. Everything is pointing towards that north, and that north in this sequence is a dynamic north. So the family that you need to follow keeps changing, and that means that you need to keep following them. Everything else was blocked out. So yeah, the way we are looking at it right now, it resembles a traditional storyboard, but what it does is actually is a surrounding story sphere.
Yes.
Of sorts.
Yes. And did you find it easy to get into that way of thinking, Douglas, of that you were in the middle of a 3D circular kind of sphere?
Yeah, pretty much so, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it has challenges, but at the same time, once you get your head around it,
Yeah.
no pun taken, but yeah. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good title for a new piece.
Yeah, we should do it. Yeah.
Around,
Let's do another. Get your head around it.
No, it's something like that. I was going to mention that because we keep finding it in these dialogues, in the creative dialogues, in the technical dialogues, that once we establish a common ground with the medium that's your, I'm going to call it your mother tongue,
Right.
the natural language that you use creatively, say storyboarding for filmmaking, we can meet there. That's middle ground where we can meet. Right. I'm seeing it as like I said before, just a silly name, story sphere, meaning that in my head I'm thinking, right, that end meets with the other end every single time.
Yeah.
But when we meet in the middle, we treat it as a storyboard. So we know that this has another sequence, another frame that comes after that, and we talk the time-based conversation.
And how many of these kinds of drawings would you create for the work?
Hey, what was it total? 30 something?
Yeah.
Yeah. They were kind of big sets per beat, per narrative beat,
Right.
and then sub-frames per change.
Right.
Kind of big visual changes. We put a lot of attention on transitions.
Yeah,
That's kind of where we put our kind of our money, our creative budget.
Point. Yeah,
Like how are we going to move from one place to another? Because there's
or lead the viewer to
Yes. How did you approach that?
sound.
Sound.
That's one of them.
Yeah.
What's the other one you reckon?
That thing that I said before, like how do you manage the north?
Right.
Being your center of attention. If you want to support that center of attention, what do you do with the other cardinal points? Do you make it exclusive? Do you make it something that's kind of either diluted or with kind of equalized centers of attention? So wherever you look, it's pretty much saying the same thing narratively.
So if you had the central viewer focused on that porthole and you wanted to attract their attention to something behind them, you would use sound to get them to turn around and see what was happening. Yeah.
What you're bringing up is at that time we had a Christmas being one of the themes of the story. There was this Christmas carol coming from the porthole.
Yeah.
So that was very kind of faint. Yeah. And this is one of this kind of invisible tricks of interactivity, which is not necessarily, okay, now you need to push a button to choose A or B. In this case was when you look at it, it's tied, it's linked to the mixer. So when you look towards the porthole, all the other tracks, the singing and the soundscape all goes down and you hear the Christmas carol.
Right.
Just that.
Right. So it's pretty subtle, directional. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can do lots with that.
Yeah.
It's a good tool to have.
Yeah.
And even though you're in control of the character isn't really in control, doesn't really know what's happening, because as a child, it's like observing, like, what's going on? Like, the mother's telling the kids, let's have Christmas carols, They're on a big ship. Like, most of these guys are, like, it was funny how they were on a cruise liner, and I remember my mother kept on, like, her mother kept on saying, oh, we're going on a big ship now, everyone. Let's get on the big ship, you know what I mean? So she was kind of sheltering from, you know, even though they knew something was up, so they were singing Christmas carols. And I remember the story my mum kept on talking about, like, she remember seeing the Christmas tree on the ship, you know, and it was dark because I had to turn all the lights off or whatever. So yeah, and the only thing that was lit was the tree.
So Kalonica, when you were working on creating the world, how did you go about deciding how full or empty to make the imagery? Because you need enough to evoke the world, but obviously you don't want to overwhelm people with detail. Did you work with Vernon on getting that aesthetic right, or was it the story that sort of dictated that?
I'd say that it was pretty tied into what we were just talking about,
Right.
the directing the user's attention towards important narrative views.
Yeah.
And Vernon's work is quite minimal anyway, so it kind of made sense, like, why include pieces of the environment that have no narrative weight?
Right.
So it's just the elements that you need to see that you can see.
Yeah. Because there is a beautiful sense of sort of floating through the work. I wonder, Vernon, when you were watching it along the production process, did you ever want to kind of add in more detail or pull things out, or?
No, not as far as adding more detail, because we talked a lot about the elements of the story, and they were all there in
Right.
the script and in the storyboard. So it was a matter of following that, and it was just, you know, everyone using their own best judgment, really. And yeah, but you know, and well, it was up to Kalonica's animation to kind of make all the transitions smooth, so that it didn't look mechanical or anything. And they, you know, that was important as well.
Yeah.
But really, for me, I lean more to a very minimal aesthetic. So the finished product especially suits me. It looks like I did it. So
That's good.
yeah, you
Well,
know.
the film is quite, I mean, the story is quite confronting, and there are some traumatic events in it, but the mood of the piece is incredibly gentle. And I'd love, Douglas, if you could just talk a little bit about how you kind of arrived at that tone. Like, did you at first think that the story should be more dramatic or less dramatic? Like, how did you arrive at the sort of final, calm, delicate quality that the work has?
Well, I guess I just have my family to thank for that, because the way how they tell the story, you know, because that's
Right.
what we were
Oh, okay.
portraying real
Yeah,
life,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
That's,
right.
yeah. We didn't want the bombing to be a gimmick or anything like that, but we knew that was, I mean, I guess I'm glad it wasn't exactly the centerpiece, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
to the work. And I guess the tone of it, again, it's seen through the eyes of a 5-year-old. That's the thing. So yeah, because it's, I guess we're trying to portray that innocence, you know. And it's kind of funny, like, you know, I go to daycare and I pick up my son, and you see 5-year-olds running around. You think, wow, you know, just imagine you just look at a 5-year-old and you think, geez, you know, they were
Sure.
getting on a boat, you know, getting transport or getting taken away. But, you know, war, I mean, a lot of people, they focus on not like war through the soldiers. I mean, you know, what happens to the people that they leave behind, or the impact. Yeah. And I guess, you know, Oscar and I, we shared the same, had similar DNA traits, you know, having both fathers, you know, or even grandfathers going through post-traumatic stress.
Sure.
And especially for a lot of black fellas back then, they didn't know exactly what it was. My grandfather, I think, sadly, that's probably why, you know, my family's become a bit fractured in some way because of that, because they just didn't know what it was or what they were dealing with at that time. So yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah.
So VR is sometimes called an empathy machine. which is a phrase I don't really
Fiona,
I don't
talk
like.
about this.
I don't like. But I'm just, you know, in its favour, it can be very immersive and very atmospheric. What do you think, Oscar, that you can achieve with a story like this in VR that adds something that you couldn't achieve in a more traditional storytelling mode? What do you think about VR? What is it about VR that adds?
Two things. One, very practical, which is undivided attention.
Right.
Until we get, the advertising, pop-ups and whatnot.
Right.
Before then, let's enjoy it.
Yeah.
It'll be awful when we get there.
Yeah.
But anyway, for now, undivided attention,
Right.
which is for content makers, awesome. And I guess for branded content as well. But that's not my world, so not my problem. But what I mean is for the user, the actual, person that's going through the experience, being able to say the equal of when you open up a book in a public space, most likely you won't be bothered. People will understand the gesture, the social gesture of, you know what, I'm on my own and I'm having time with myself. With the headset, we get that. So being able to spend time with the story and with the story world that we are sharing with them with undivided attention, beautiful.
Everyone will have a different experience with the work, like even though it has, a duration of about 10 minutes, people could spend longer in there,
Right.
and just take it in.
Right.
And just, immerse themselves. And others will, flip through, try to get to the end, because they believe there's an A and there's a B, but others will just, explore. And as I said before, everyone in the room who has experienced it will have a different perspective or a different take, or will take away a different feeling or emotion from it.
But that's the same with a linear film, isn't it?
That's true.
That people will bring their own experience to it.
Mm.
But you like the fact that people are in their headset? That they're kind of fully immersed in the work?
I think the thing about VR, it's developing technology. It's really exciting, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, but there is the thing about VRTOV is that we work with interactive VR, right? And the current state of VR has two main flavors:
Sure.
the 360 film, not VR, and interactive VR, real-time game-based, game engine-based.
Yeah. It's very different.
When we do things, even the minimal engagement of just changing the framing, that you do that, not the camera person, not the camera operator, not the director, not the editor, but you do it yourself, is the illusion of engagement, which is quite different than staring at a film.
Sure.
So we can say it is pretty similar to film, as in, I connect with that character. I think and I kind of vicariously feel that their life is something that I can, connect with. But the illusion of engagement, of direct engagement with something, which is to say holding the hand of a character, and actually, if you let go of that hand, something narrative happens.
Right.
Not just practical in your physical reality, but actually in narrative space. That's a different engagement.
Right. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. I think we might now open up to questions. Does anyone in the audience have a question for anyone on the panel? I think we've got a microphone here. Yes, down the front.
Surprise,
Sorry.
Mike.
Oh, sorry. I thought she was just wiping her hair when she had a question.
Can you just talk about the schedule a little bit, how it breaks down between how long Vernon's artwork takes to create as opposed to then translating it to the 3D elements?
How long does your work take?
Well, I live in Brisbane, and VRTOV is here in Melbourne, and Doug's travels around the world being wonderful. And so I think if we were all here or in one location, or all of us, it would have been pretty quick, I reckon. Would have been maybe a few months, the whole project, I think. But because, and I really only had, apart from the swatches and stuff, I really only had 2 full weeks. So it was very much Oscar saying, Vernon is just saying, do this, and then we'd look at
Please, I said please every single time.
Please do this. Please do this. And but it was also myself, you know, kind of tapping Kalonica on the shoulder and Brad over here, saying, you know, what happened? What's with this? What about this? And but that's when I was here. Yeah. So, but I think if I had a couple of months here, we could have done, like where even now when I look at the product, I just think, oh yeah, I could have done that or could have done this. But mind you, there's a heap that I could not have done. So that's down to Kalonica. But that's my thinking. Yeah, well, we could have produced something very quickly, and that's very interesting to me. Given that Doug had already done the work in terms of research and the story, and the storyboarding was already done as well. So I kind of, I'm pretty sure I was dropped into the middle of the project, not the beginning. So, yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, because of that and being in different sites, this project had big components in Queensland and big component here in Melbourne. We wanted to have a few anchoring images from Vernon, straight from his hand onto the the boards, but also a big collection to draw from. Is that a pun? That's not a pun.
No.
Second language, right? Excuse me. So yeah, a big catalog of mild strokes, faint strokes, curved strokes, harder use of charcoal, softer use of charcoal, softer material, harder material, and we got lots of that from Vernon, in a way to make it like a database that we can access to create these different components that Kalonica created.
Also, it comes down to experience, because we have, again, a shorthand between ourselves, like most of us have worked on, a lot of major projects, sorry, and yeah, so just having that, I don't know, that shorthand of understanding, I mean, like, I don't know, I can't think of anything that went down, no? Like,
it was that, but we were all committed to it.
Yeah.
I probably had the least understanding of the process, so because of that, if Oscar said, try this, I'd say, yeah, okay.
And that was wonderful.
And because Oscar would say, do you want to try this? And I'm like, yeah. I'm here. Let's give that a go. Because we had very long days that none of us minded actually.
I really want to attest to your openness.
Cool.
Your openness, Vernon, to get engaged and go for it. That was beautiful to work with.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Again, it comes down to experience, seriously, because it takes years and years of telling stories, I guess, and even though you might think, well, that was easy, but you've been doing this for years, man,
it was a tool that I'm used to, and for me it was also exciting, kind of, explaining charcoal to everybody for the purposes of something very different, and then seeing it turned around fresh for me. So, but instantly recognisable, of course. Yeah. So and also in the VR environment, you not only get to see charcoal differently, but you get to see it at different scales, and there's a distance to it because you're in VR, and there's a nearness to it. It's right there, and sometimes, other times it's far away, but it's still charcoal, and that was the point that Oscar was, kind of impressing on me very early in the process that, this is charcoal. We want to make this about. The whole project was still about drawing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we have another question.
Hi, Vernon. Now you've had a taste of your own artwork in VR, would you see yourself doing any more VR projects?
Oh, my head is full of them now.
Correct answer.
So there's not enough VR companies to kind of work with now.
Yeah. More VR. There you go. How's that?
Yeah. I just start, even sitting here, I'm thinking, oh, yeah, could do that. And just like the faces, like my face that was moulded over a digital model there that Kalonica showed in her talk, that was one of the very first things that VRTOV showed me. And the very first day, that's what I walked into. I'm like, oh, what? It's like, that's my drawing. And I recognised it as my drawing, but yeah. And then Kalonica just explained what the process was, and I was thinking, oh, got to get me more of that.
It's kind of terrifying from my perspective to be like, here's this.
That's right.
You
were quite terrified.
I'm really sorry.
Yeah, but I had quite the opposite reaction. I think I thought, oh wow, this is amazing. So.
Well, it's our experience working here at ACMI with lots of different artists, and sometimes you just become aware that artists who have a really great practice, who are pretty secure in their practice, make really great collaborators because they're confident enough to open up and work with colleagues. It can often be, at first you think, I'll be too intimidated to ask this artist to kind of share their marks with us. But, if people have a strong practice, often they can collaborate in a really great way. People like Sean Tan, because they know what they're about and what the heart of their work is, and so they have that confidence, which means that people like Kalonica can come in and bring it to life in a different medium in a really successful collaboration.
Yeah, well, I wasn't afraid of animation or video or anything like that.
But Kalonica was. Do we have any other questions?
I'm not exactly clear on the process. So was there any scanning involved, or did you literally recreate every stroke of the original?
It was kind of a Frankenstein. So with the swatches Vernon made, we'd scan a stroke, but then make that stroke do other things. If that makes sense. Like that stroke is now this entire house, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I realised that you could grab a stroke that was, say, this long and this wide and stretch it out. And you could not only stretch it out to be very thin, you could stretch it out to be very long. And you could also, in VR, you can go right in close on it and have that be something entirely different. And so that's all of that I find incredibly exciting.
For the technically minded in the audience, we didn't stretch them, right? We tiled them. So, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but I mean that's the point I'm making is that's what you can do. And you can not only grab a stroke like that, but you can flip it on its side and approach it from the end. And that sort of thing, and ride along it. So all of that is really exciting for me, I think. So.
Do we have any other questions?
Hi. Do you have any feedback yet from people who've had the opportunity to go into the world that were close to the actual event or similar events, and what their reactions have been?
No, although it's funny when my mum says, "What are you doing that story?" What's so special about that? Oh, God. Yeah, so yeah, no. Because it's fairly new. So, we haven't, all the other people who have, obviously experienced it thinks it's really cool, but yeah.
Well, I'm sure that will come.
Yeah, once my mum will figure out how to use that thing. Although we haven't road tested it on, someone around her
But you
age.
haven't given her a go at the goggles.
No, she's far trying to run my phone. She has no idea.
my mum wouldn't. I don't know. I'd have to convince her that it's worthwhile, actually.
Yeah.
She'd probably just think, it's 10 minutes out of my life I'm never going to get back.
That's,
Your mum's the same.
Same, yeah. Even my parents, my mum's watching something on TV and Dad would go, "Oh, Pappy, what are you watching this crap for?" And Mum says, "Your son made that crap." That's when you know you've made it.
That's when you know it's all worthwhile.
Yeah, it's like all those years. That's who you want to impress now.
Yeah. That's how you know you're never going to get rich from it.
You never know. I think on that slightly ambiguous note, we might finish up tonight, so please join me in thanking the artists from tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.